Deep in the Colorado Rockies, where winter temperatures drop to 40 below and snowfall can bury entire cabins overnight, 70-year-old Samuel Creek had lived alone for 3 decades. When the great blizzard of 2019 hit with unprecedented fury, burying roads under 20 feet of snow and cutting off all communication, rescue teams marked him as another casualty. But Samuel wasn't just any mountain hermit. He was a former military engineer who'd been preparing for this moment since 1989. While families huddled in their failing homes and rescue helicopters couldn't fly, Samuel descended into his masterpiece, a sprawling underground complex carved directly into the mountain's granite heart. Solar panels disguised as rocks, geothermal heating systems, hydroponic gardens, water filtration that could last decades. The old man hadn't just survived, he'd built an underground city that could sustain life through the apocalypse itself. When spring finally melted the snow, what rescue teams discovered beneath Samuel's humble cabin would revolutionize everything experts thought they knew about off-grid survival. But why had he built it? And what was he really preparing for? The morning Sheriff Kate Morrison received the call about Samuel Creek. She was already dealing with 17 confirmed dead and 43 missing persons scattered across 3 counties. The blizzard had claimed more lives than any natural disaster in Colorado's recorded history. "Another welfare check," Deputy Martinez said, sliding the paperwork across her desk. "Samuel Creek, age 70, lives alone up on Granite Ridge. No contact since the storm hit 6 weeks ago." Kate rubbed her tired eyes. 6 weeks since the National Weather Service had issued warnings about the storm of the century. 6 weeks since the temperature plummeted to -47 degrees Fahrenheit. 6 weeks since communication towers froze and snapped like twigs. "Creek," she muttered, recognizing the name. "That crazy hermit who yells at hikers? That's him. Owns about 40 acres of worthless rock and timber. Been up there since the late 80s, pays his taxes in cash, never causes trouble beyond telling people to stay off his land." Kate studied the topographical map. Granite Ridge sat at nearly 11,000 feet elevation, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that was treacherous even in summer. During the blizzard, it would have been completely impassable. No family, none listed. Guy's a ghost. No social media, no credit cards, barely any records except property taxes and an old military file. "Military?" Martinez nodded. "Army Corps of Engineers, honorable discharge in 1987. Specialized in excavation and construction. Served in some classified projects, but most of his file is redacted." Something about that detail nagged at Kate, though she couldn't say why. Most hermits had stories. Bitter divorces, financial ruin, family tragedies that drove them into isolation. But classified military work was different. "When can we get up there? Road crews finished plowing the access road yesterday. It's rough, but passable with chains." An hour later, Kate found herself grinding up the mountain in her department SUV, Martinez riding shotgun. The devastation was stunning even by Colorado standards. Ancient pines lay shattered like matchsticks. Rock slides had carved new scars into the mountainsides. Several cabins they passed looked like they'd been hit by artillery shells. "Jesus," Martinez whispered as they rounded a bend. "Look at that!" A neighbor's cabin had collapsed entirely, crushed under the weight of accumulated snow and falling trees. The roof had pancaked down to the foundation, leaving only splinters and debris. How the hell could anyone survive up here? Kate was wondering the same thing. The destruction was biblical. If structures built to modern codes couldn't withstand the storm, what chance did an old hermit have in whatever ramshackle cabin he'd been living in for 30 years? They found Samuel Creek's property at the end of a narrow track, marked only by a faded no trespassing sign riddled with bullet holes. Kate killed the engine and stepped out into the thin mountain air. The silence was absolute. Before them sat a modest log cabin, maybe 800 square feet, with a corrugated metal roof and a stone chimney. It looked weathered but intact. No smoke rose from the chimney. No footprints marked the snow around the building. "Mr. Creek," Kate called out. "Sheriff's Department, welfare check." Nothing. They approached the cabin carefully, noting the small details that spoke of a careful, organized mind. The woodpile was neatly stacked and covered. A small solar panel was mounted on the south-facing roof. The windows were clean and fitted with heavy shutters. Martinez tried the door. Locked. "Mr. Creek, we're coming in." The interior was spartanly clean. A wood stove sat cold. Canned goods lined simple shelves. Everything was orderly, almost military in its precision, but the cabin felt abandoned, like no one had been there for months. "Where is he?" Martinez asked. Kate was studying the back wall, where something seemed off. The logs didn't quite align properly, and there were scuff marks on the floor. That's when she noticed the hidden door. The wind had died to a whisper by the time Sarah Chen's boots crunched through the crystalline crust that had formed over 3 feet of fresh powder. Behind her, the 4-person search team spread out in formation, their orange safety gear a stark contrast against the pristine wilderness that stretched endlessly toward the jagged peaks of the Cascade Range. "GPS shows we're about half a mile from his last known coordinates," called out Marcus Webb, the team leader whose weathered face spoke of decades spent in these mountains. His breath formed small clouds that dissipated quickly in the brittle air. "Chen, what's your read on the terrain ahead?" Sarah adjusted her pack and pulled out her tablet, its screen barely visible through her thick gloves. As the team's technical specialist, she'd spent the previous evening studying satellite imagery and topographical data of the area where Jacob Thorne had supposedly taken shelter. The man had lived alone up here for 30 years, appearing in town only for essential supplies, paying cash, speaking to no one unless absolutely necessary. "According to the maps, there's a natural depression about 200 yards northeast," she replied, squinting against the sun's reflection off the snow. "If he was looking for windbreak, that would be his best bet." The 4th team member, a local deputy named Rodriguez, shook his head grimly. "Windbreak or not, nobody survives 5 days in that storm. We're looking for a body at this point." Sarah had been thinking the same thing, but something nagged at her about this case. Thorne had survived 3 decades in conditions that would kill most people within hours. The man had to possess knowledge and skills that went far beyond typical wilderness survival. When she'd mentioned this to Webb, he'd simply shrugged and reminded her that even the most experienced outdoorsman made fatal mistakes. They pressed forward through the deep snow, each step requiring deliberate effort. The storm had been a monster, dropping nearly 4 feet of snow in 36 hours while sustained winds reached 70 miles per hour. Weather stations had recorded temperatures that plummeted to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Even with modern equipment and heated shelters, the search teams had been forced to wait 2 full days before venturing out. "Movement ahead," announced Torres, the team's tracker, raising his hand to halt their progress. He pointed toward a cluster of pine trees whose heavy branches had created a natural snow cave. "Could be wildlife, but something's definitely disturbing the snow pattern." Sarah raised her binoculars and scanned the area. The snow around the trees showed clear signs of recent activity, not the random disturbances created by wind, but deliberate pathways that suggested human movement. Her pulse quickened as she adjusted the focus. "There," she whispered, lowering the binoculars. "Footprints, recent ones, maybe 6 hours old." The team exchanged glances. If Thorne was alive and mobile, their rescue mission had just shifted from recovery to active search and rescue. They moved toward the tree line with renewed urgency, following the faint depressions in the snow that led deeper into the forest. The trail wound between massive Douglas firs and across small clearings where the snow lay undisturbed except for the single set of tracks they followed. Sarah noticed that the footprints showed no signs of stumbling or erratic movement that might indicate hypothermia or exhaustion. Whoever had made these tracks was moving with purpose and surprising energy. After 20 minutes of careful tracking, Torres suddenly stopped and knelt beside a particularly clear footprint. He brushed away loose snow and studied the impression carefully before looking up at the others with confusion evident on his face. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, pointing to the print. "Look at the depth and the clarity of the edges. This print was made by someone wearing light hiking boots, not winter gear. The depression suggests normal body weight, not someone carrying a heavy survival pack." Webb crouched beside him and examined the track. "You're saying he's moving through this terrain without proper equipment?" "I'm saying he's moving through this terrain like it's a summer hike," Torres replied. "No snowshoes, no heavy boots, no sign that he's struggling with the conditions at all." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She'd researched Thorne extensively before the mission, combing through 30 years of sporadic sightings and brief encounters. The man was an enigma. No official records, no family, no history before he'd appeared in the mountains 3 decades ago. Local residents described him as polite but distant, always seeming to possess exactly what he needed, despite living in apparent isolation. "The trail's heading upslope," Torres announced, studying the tracks that disappeared over a rocky ridge ahead, toward the really remote areas where the maps get sketchy. Webb checked his watch and calculated their remaining daylight. "We follow for another hour, then we reassess. If Thorne's alive and moving, we need to find him before another weather system moves in." As they climbed toward the ridge, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led somewhere specific. The tracks seemed too purposeful, too deliberate for someone simply seeking shelter. It was almost as if Jacob Thorne wanted to be found. The underground chamber stretched far beyond what their headlamps could illuminate, swallowing their beams in darkness that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. Sarah Martinez stepped carefully across the threshold, her breath forming clouds in the surprisingly warm air. Behind her, Jake's camera clicked steadily, documenting what might be the discovery of the decade. "Jesus Christ," whispered Tom Chen, the third member of their search team. His voice echoed strangely in the vast space, as if the walls themselves were listening. How long would it take to dig something like this? Sarah ran her hand along the nearest wall, feeling the smooth finish of what appeared to be reinforced concrete. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, not the rough excavation she'd expected from a hermit's hideout, but something approaching professional construction quality. "Decades," she murmured. "This had to take decades." They moved deeper into the main corridor, their lights revealing alcoves and passages branching off in multiple directions. The floor beneath their feet was level and dry, covered with what looked like interlocking rubber mats. Overhead, a complex network of pipes and cables ran along the ceiling, disappearing into the mountain's depths. "Look at this," Jake called out, his light trained on a junction box mounted to the wall. "This isn't some cobbled-together survival bunker, this is engineered infrastructure." Sarah joined him, studying the electrical setup. Multiple circuits were clearly labeled in neat handwriting: hydroponics east, ventilation primary, communications, water processing. Her mind raced as she processed the implications. "He's got power down here, running water. This isn't a hiding place, it's a functioning underground facility." A soft humming sound drifted from somewhere ahead, barely audible but definitely mechanical. Tom tensed, his hand moving instinctively to the radio clipped to his jacket. "Should we call this in? I mean, if he's actually down here." "Not yet," Sarah said, though uncertainty gnawed at her. Protocol demanded they report any significant developments immediately, but something about this discovery felt too important, too delicate for radio chatter that half the county could intercept. "Let's get a better sense of what we're dealing with first." They followed the main passage as it curved gently to the left, revealing more side tunnels and what appeared to be sealed doorways. Emergency lighting strips began to appear along the baseboards, dormant now but clearly part of an integrated system. The temperature remained surprisingly comfortable, suggesting active climate control. "Motion sensor," Jake announced, pointing his light at a small device mounted high on the wall. "We're definitely being tracked." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. By who? The system, or... Her question was answered by a crackling sound from speakers they couldn't see. followed by a voice that made all three of them freeze. "You're trespassing." The words echoed from multiple directions, suggesting a sophisticated audio system. The voice was male, measured, and very much alive. Sarah's throat went dry as she realized their missing person case had just become something entirely different. "Mr. Henley," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're with the county search and rescue team. People are worried about you. The storm—" "I know about the storm." The response came immediately, as if he'd been listening to their entire conversation. "Been through worse. Question is, what are you really doing down here?" Jake stepped forward, camera still in hand. "We're here to help. Your neighbor reported you missing when—" "No cameras." The voice cut him off with sudden sharpness. "Turn it off, now." The authority in those words was unmistakable, and Jake's hands moved to power down the device without conscious thought. Sarah noticed Tom's hand was still hovering near his radio, and she caught his eye, shaking her head slightly. Whatever was happening here, it required delicate handling. "We just want to make sure you're safe," Sarah said, addressing the empty corridor. "The blizzard topside is the worst in 30 years. Emergency services assumed I was dead." There was something that might have been amusement in the voice now. "Not the first time. Won't be the last." A section of wall ahead of them suddenly shifted, revealing itself to be a concealed door. Warm light spilled out, and Sarah could see the edge of what appeared to be a furnished room beyond, but no figure appeared in the doorway. "You can come in," the voice continued, "but understand something first. What you found here doesn't exist. What you see here stays here. Are we clear?" Sarah exchanged glances with her team members. Tom looked like he wanted to bolt back to the surface immediately. Jake was practically vibrating with curiosity, despite having been forced to shut down his camera. They were way outside normal search and rescue protocol now, venturing into territory that felt more like a spy novel than a missing person case. But Harold Henley was alive, and that had been their primary objective. "We're clear," she said finally, and stepped toward the light. The metal door groaned on its hinges as Sarah pushed it wider, her headlamp cutting through the darkness beyond. The beam revealed a corridor that stretched into blackness, its walls lined with the same reinforced concrete as the entrance chamber. The air was warmer here, carrying scents of wood smoke and something else, something organic and earthy. "Jesus Christ!" Marcus whispered behind her, his voice echoing off the walls. "How far does this go?" Sarah stepped across the threshold, her boots silent on what appeared to be polished stone flooring. The construction was meticulous, professional-grade work that would have required industrial equipment and expertise far beyond what any hermit should possess. Emergency lighting fixtures hung from the ceiling at regular intervals, though they remained dark. "Thomas?" she called out, her voice swallowed by the tunnel. "Thomas Brennan, can you hear me?" Only echoes answered. The corridor branched after 30 feet, splitting into 3 passages. Sarah paused, studying the options. Each tunnel was marked with small, hand-carved symbols etched into the concrete, a water droplet, a flame, and what looked like a gear or mechanical wheel. "Which way?" Marcus asked, though his question carried an undertone of uncertainty about whether they should continue at all. Sarah chose the middle passage, following the flame symbol. The tunnel sloped gently downward, leading them deeper into the mountain. After another 50 feet, it opened into a larger chamber that made both rescuers stop dead. The room was a fully functional living space, carved directly from the bedrock and finished with surprising comfort. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its chimney disappearing up through the rock ceiling. Handcrafted furniture filled the space. A solid oak table, chairs that looked like they'd been assembled from salvaged materials, but with remarkable skill, shelves lined with hundreds of books. Kerosene lamps provided warm lighting, and a thick Persian rug covered the central floor area. "This isn't some survival bunker," Marcus said, running his hand along the smooth stone wall. "This is a home." Sarah moved deeper into the room, her trained eye cataloguing details. No dust on the surfaces, a coffee mug sitting on the table with dark residue in the bottom, a book lying open next to it, Something about hydroponics. The fire in the Har place had burned down to cold ashes, but the smell suggested it had been lit within the past day or two. "He was here recently," she said, touching the mug's rim. "Very recently." A sound echoed from somewhere deeper in the complex, a rhythmic thumping, like machinery or something heavy being moved. Both rescuers froze, listening intently. "Thomas?" Sarah called again, louder this time. The sound stopped. Marcus had found another passage leading out of the living area, this one wider than the others. "Sarah, you need to see this." She followed him through an archway into what could only be described as a workshop. Workbenches lined the walls, equipped with tools both primitive and sophisticated. A lathe sat in one corner, clearly handmade but engineered with precision. Shelves held components that looked like radio parts, batteries, and electronic equipment she couldn't immediately identify. But it was the wall display that captured her attention. Dozens of photographs, newspaper clippings, and hand-drawn maps covered nearly every inch of available space. Some photos showed the mountain from various angles, marked with surveyor's notations and elevation measurements. Others depicted the complex itself during construction. Images of Thomas Brennan, recognizable despite 30 years of aging, operating heavy machinery in underground chambers. "How did he get construction equipment down here?" Marcus asked, studying a photo that showed a small excavator in what appeared to be this very room. Sarah was examining the newspaper clippings, missing persons reports from towns within a 100-mile radius, some dating back decades, articles about unexplained disappearances in the mountains, weather pattern studies, and, strangest of all, what appeared to be geological surveys of the entire mountain range, marked with notes in Thomas's precise handwriting. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I don't think Thomas built this place just to hide from the world." Before he could respond, the mechanical sound resumed from somewhere even deeper in the complex. This time it was accompanied by something else, a low humming that seemed to vibrate through the stone floors. The emergency lighting suddenly flickered to life throughout the complex, bathing everything in stark white illumination. Somewhere in the distance, they heard the unmistakable sound of a generator starting up. Sarah's radio crackled with static, then cleared enough for dispatch to break through. "Rescue 1, be advised we're reading some kind of energy signature from your location. Are you running any electrical equipment down there?" She exchanged glances with Marcus, both thinking the same thing. They weren't running anything, but someone, or something, clearly was. The humming grew louder, and now they could hear what sounded distinctly like footsteps echoing from the depths of Thomas Brennan's impossible underground world. The metal door sealed behind them with a pneumatic hiss that made Sarah's ears pop. Emergency lighting flickered on automatically, casting everything in an eerie amber glow. Marcus swept his flashlight beam across what appeared to be an airlock chamber, complete with gauges, valves, and a decontamination system that looked like it belonged in a government facility. "Jesus Christ," Rodriguez whispered, running his fingers along the smooth concrete walls. "This isn't some survivalist bunker. This is military grade." Sarah studied the construction with growing unease. The concrete was reinforced with steel mesh, the kind used in bunkers designed to withstand explosions. Ventilation ducts ran along the ceiling, disappearing into darkness. Everything was clean, functional, and absolutely pristine despite being buried under tons of snow and rock. "How long did you say Holbrook's been up here?" Marcus asked, checking the seals around the inner door. 30 years, give or take," Sarah replied, but even as she said it, doubts crept in. The man they'd been told about was a hermit who'd lost his family in a car accident and retreated to the mountains to drink himself to death in solitude. This level of engineering suggested something else entirely. The inner door opened with the same pneumatic precision, revealing a corridor that stretched beyond their flashlight beams. Motion sensors triggered overhead lighting as they moved forward, illuminating a space that defied every assumption they'd made about their missing person. The main corridor was wide enough for 3 people to walk abreast, with branching passages leading off into darkness. The floors were polished concrete, the walls lined with what appeared to be storage compartments and monitoring equipment. Digital displays showed environmental readings, power levels, and other data that scrolled past too quickly to read. "Power's still on," Rodriguez observed, studying a panel of blinking lights. After 3 days of blizzard, he's still got full power down here. They passed the first branching corridor, and Sarah caught a glimpse of what lay beyond. Rows upon rows of shelving disappeared into the distance, stocked with supplies that would last decades. Not just canned goods and water, but sophisticated equipment she couldn't immediately identify. "Sir," Rodriguez called from ahead, his voice tight with concern, "you need to see this." They gathered around a wall-mounted display that showed a detailed schematic of the facility. The underground complex was massive, 5 levels deep, with multiple escape tunnels, redundant power systems, and what appeared to be a fully equipped medical bay. But it was the labeling that made Sarah's blood run cold. Every section was marked with military designations: Op Center, Communications Array, Weapons Storage, NBC Decon. "NBC," Marcus muttered. "Nuclear, biological, chemical. This isn't a survival bunker, it's a command facility." A soft chime echoed through the corridor, followed by a synthesized voice, "Motion detected in Sector 7. Lockdown protocols initiated." The lights dimmed to red, and somewhere in the distance, they heard the unmistakable sound of heavy doors sealing shut. "That's not automated," Sarah said, her hand moving instinctively to her radio. "Someone's here." They continued forward with weapons drawn, though what they were preparing to face remained unclear. The corridor opened into a vast central chamber that took their breath away. The space was circular, 3 stories high, with a spiral staircase leading down to lower levels. Banks of monitors lined the walls, displaying feeds from cameras scattered across the mountain. Some showed the blizzard raging outside, but others revealed views of the valley below, the highway, and even what appeared to be the search and rescue staging area where their vehicles were parked. "He's been watching us," Rodriguez said, studying the feeds. "From the moment we arrived, he's known we were coming." A movement on one of the screens caught Sarah's attention. A figure in white winter gear was moving through what appeared to be another section of the facility. The image quality was too poor to make out details, but the person moved with purpose, checking equipment and monitoring displays. "There," she pointed. "Level 3, East Corridor." The figure on the screen paused, then turned directly toward the camera. Even through the grainy footage, they could see him clearly now, a man in his 60s with steel-grey hair and alert eyes that seemed to look directly at them. He raised one hand in what might have been a greeting, then deliberately switched off the camera feed. "William Holbrook," Marcus said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced that's who they were dealing with. A new voice echoed through the chamber, not synthesized this time, but human and surprisingly calm. "I'm sorry you had to come down here. I really hoped the storm would be enough to keep everyone away until I could finish." Sarah keyed her radio to respond, then realized he wasn't using their frequency. His voice was coming through the facility's intercom system. "Finish what?" she called out to the empty air. A long pause then, 30 years of preparation. "And now, I'm afraid, it's time to find out if any of it was worth a damn." The generator hummed to life with a mechanical wheeze that made Sarah jump. Emergency lighting flickered on throughout the cavern, revealing the true scope of what lay before them. The underground space stretched far beyond what their flashlights had shown, a vast network of interconnected chambers carved directly into the mountain's heart. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered, lowering his rifle as amber lights illuminated row after row of shelving units, each meticulously labeled and stocked. "How long did you say this guy's been missing?" 3 days, Sarah replied, though her voice carried uncertainty now. Everything about this place suggested planning that spanned decades, not the desperate shelter of a man caught in a sudden storm. Elena moved deeper into the main chamber, her medical training making her catalogue details the others might miss. The air quality was perfect, not just breathable, but clean in a way that spoke of sophisticated filtration systems. The temperature remained steady despite the blizzard raging above. Most tellingly, nothing showed signs of recent disturbance. "Look at this," Jake called from near what appeared to be a communications station. Banks of radio equipment lined a custom-built desk with frequencies marked in careful handwriting. A logbook lay open beside the microphones, entries dating back months. He's been monitoring emergency channels, weather services, even military frequencies. Sarah approached the radio setup, scanning the recent entries. Weather observations, personnel movements in the valley below, detailed notes about their own rescue operations over the years. Her blood chilled as she recognized specific incidents, searches they'd conducted, techniques they'd used, even personal details about team members. "He's been watching us," she said quietly, "for years." The implications settled over the team like a weight. Marcus checked the safety on his weapon again, his military instincts screaming that they weren't alone despite the apparent emptiness. Elena continued her methodical examination of the living space, noting the efficiency of every design choice, the redundant systems, the sheer sophistication of construction that would have required heavy machinery somehow transported into an inaccessible mountain peak. "Here's what I don't understand," Elena said, running her hand along a support beam that showed no tool marks, as if it had been machined to perfect smoothness. The official records show Thomas Hartwell as a basic homesteader. Kept to himself, paid his taxes, no criminal background, nothing about engineering expertise or the resources this would have required. Jake found another corridor leading deeper into the mountain. Unlike the main chamber, this passage showed recent use, fresh boot prints in dust that had settled elsewhere, a coffee cup still warm to the touch, sitting on a narrow ledge. He called the others over, pointing out the evidence. "Someone's here," he said unnecessarily. Sarah took point as they moved into the corridor, their footsteps echoing despite attempts at stealth. The passage curved gradually, following the natural contours of the rock, but the walls showed the same impossible precision as the main chamber. Every few feet, smaller chambers branched off, storage rooms, workshops, what appeared to be a laboratory, complete with equipment Sarah couldn't identify. The corridor opened into another vast space, this one clearly designed for a different purpose. Instead of storage and living quarters, they found themselves looking at something resembling a command center. Multiple screens lined the walls, most dark but several displaying what looked like topographical maps, weather data, and surveillance feeds from cameras positioned throughout the valley. "Look at the date stamps," Elena said, studying the surveillance monitors. The feeds were live, showing various locations around the mountain in real time, despite the blizzard. Marcus moved to examine the maps, his expression growing more troubled by the moment. Red pins marked specific locations throughout the region, some corresponding to known trails and shelters, others indicating places that didn't appear on any official survey. Lines connected the pins in patterns that suggested something far more complex than simple navigation aids. "This isn't a survival shelter," Sarah realized, the pieces finally clicking together. "It's an observation post, maybe something more." A sound from deeper in the complex made them all freeze, the distant echo of footsteps, deliberate and unhurried. Someone was moving through the tunnels ahead of them, not running or hiding, but walking with the confidence of someone in familiar territory. Jake reached for his radio to contact base camp, but found only static across all channels. The same sophisticated systems that maintained this underground facility were apparently capable of blocking their communications with the outside world. "We're on our own," he reported quietly. Sarah had to make a decision. They could retreat to the entrance, try to wait out the storm and report what they'd found, or they could continue deeper, following the sounds ahead and potentially finding answers to questions that were multiplying by the minute. The footsteps echoed again, closer now, and with them came the faint sound of humming, a casual, comfortable sound that suggested whoever was ahead of them felt completely at ease in this underground maze. The steel door groaned as Sarah pulled it shut behind them, the metallic echo reverberating through what felt like a cathedral-sized space. Marcus fumbled for his headlamp, the beam cutting through absolute darkness to reveal smooth concrete walls that stretched beyond their light's reach. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, his voice swallowed by the vastness. "How big is this place?" Elena swept her light in a wide arc, revealing support beams that disappeared into shadows overhead. The air was warm, impossibly warm after the bitter cold above, and carried the faint hum of machinery. This isn't just a shelter, it's an entire facility. They moved forward cautiously, their footsteps echoing off polished concrete floors. The main corridor was wide enough for a vehicle, with smaller passages branching off at regular intervals. Emergency lighting flickered to life as they walked, sensors detecting their movement. "Motion activated," Tom observed, running his hand along the wall. The wiring alone must have taken years to install. Sarah paused at the first junction, peering down a side passage that seemed to curve away into the mountain's heart. 30 years, she said quietly. "He's been working on this for 30 years, while everyone thought he was just some crazy hermit." The corridor opened into a central hub, and they stopped in collective amazement. 6 passages radiated outward like spokes of a wheel, each marked with hand-carved wooden signs: workshop, storage, communications, living quarters, hydroponics, and one that simply read deep. "Communications," Elena said immediately, heading for the marked tunnel. "If there's any way to reach the outside world." The communications room was a marvel of jury-rigged technology and military surplus equipment. Banks of radio equipment lined the walls, with antenna cables snaking up through carefully drilled shafts in the rock ceiling. A computer workstation dominated the center, multiple monitors displaying weather data, news feeds, and what looked like security camera footage from around the mountain. Marcus examined the radio setup while Elena powered up the computer system. "This is serious hardware. He could probably reach satellites with this setup." "The question is why he built it," Sarah said, studying the security feeds. The cameras showed multiple exterior positions, the cabin they'd searched, several trailheads, even the main road miles below. "This isn't just about surviving in the wilderness. He's been watching everything." Tom had found a logbook beside the main radio, its pages filled with Harold's meticulous handwriting. "Listen to this," he said, flipping through entries. "Day 8847, seismic activity increased 0.3% from baseline. Pressure readings suggest minor shift in underlying geological structure. Day 8893, radio chatter indicates increased government geological surveys in region, maintaining surveillance protocols." "Geological surveys?" Elena looked up from the computer. What was he monitoring? Sarah moved to examine a detailed topographical map mounted on the wall, covered with colored pins and penciled notations. "These markings, they're all over the mountain range. Red pins, blue pins, some kind of pattern." The computer finally connected to Harold's network, revealing folders upon folders of data. Elena opened the most recent files, finding weather predictions that went far beyond anything the National Weather Service provided. "He wasn't just predicting this blizzard," she said, scrolling through atmospheric models and pressure readings. "He knew exactly when it would hit and how severe it would be." Marcus had managed to get the main radio operational. Static filled the room before he found a clear frequency. "Search and rescue operations suspended due to extreme conditions. All teams return to base. Repeat, all personnel return to base immediately." "We need to respond," Elena said, reaching for the microphone. "Wait." Sarah's voice was sharp. She was studying the security feeds more closely. "Look at camera 7. The monitor showed the trail they'd used to reach the cabin, but something was moving through the blizzard. Dark shapes, barely visible against the white, but definitely there. And definitely not rescue teams. "Who the hell is that?" Tom moved closer to the screen. Elena zoomed in as much as the camera allowed. The figures were in military-style gear, moving with tactical precision despite the storm conditions. Professional, well-equipped. They're not here for rescue. Marcus tried another radio frequency, picking up fragments of encrypted communication. The voices were clipped, efficient. Military or government? Harold knew, Sarah said suddenly, pieces clicking together in her mind. All this surveillance, the geological monitoring, the timing of his disappearance right before the storm. He knew someone was coming. A new sound echoed through the facility, the distant groan of the entrance door opening. The motion-activated lights in the main corridor began flickering on in sequence, marking the progress of whoever had just entered Harold's underground world. Elena quickly shut down the computer monitors while Marcus killed the radio. They moved to the communications room's entrance, watching the lights trace a path toward the central hub. "How did they find the entrance so quickly?" Tom whispered. Sarah's blood ran cold as understanding hit her, because they already knew it was here. The passage narrowed ahead, forcing them into single file. Sarah's headlamp beam danced across walls that shifted from rough stone to something altogether different, smooth concrete reinforced with steel mesh. The change was so abrupt it made her stop short, causing Marcus to bump into her back. "What the hell?" Marcus whispered, running his gloved hand along the seamless transition. "This isn't natural cave formation anymore." Dr. Chen squeezed past them, her breath visible in small puffs as she examined the construction. "The precision is remarkable. He somehow integrated artificial tunnels with the existing cave system." She pressed her palm against the concrete. Still solid after 3 decades underground, Jake's voice crackled through their radios from somewhere ahead. "You need to see this, all of you." They followed the tunnel as it curved gradually downward, their footsteps echoing differently now, crisper, more contained. Emergency lighting fixtures hung at regular intervals, dark but clearly functional. Sarah noticed ventilation grates near the ceiling, evidence of an air circulation system that defied everything she thought she knew about off-grid survival. The tunnel opened into a vast circular chamber that stole their breath. Their combined headlamp beams couldn't reach the far walls. Jake stood at the center, slowly rotating his light to reveal the scope of what surrounded them. "My God," Dr. Chen breathed. The chamber was a masterpiece of underground engineering. Multiple levels connected by metal staircases spiraled along the walls. Doorways and alcoves dotted the perimeter at regular intervals, each leading deeper into the mountain. The ceiling arched 40 feet above them, supported by massive concrete pillars that Elias had somehow managed to pour and cure in absolute secrecy. "The logistics alone," Marcus said, his voice filled with reluctant admiration. "How does one man move this much material without anyone noticing?" Sarah approached one of the staircases, testing its stability. The metal rang solid under her weight. 30 years. He had 30 years to do it gradually, bit by bit. She looked up at the multiple levels. "Question is, what was he preparing for?" Jake had moved to what appeared to be a control panel mounted on one of the pillars. Dozens of switches, gauges, and indicator lights covered the surface. "This looks like it controls the entire facility. Power, water, ventilation." He hesitated before flipping the main switch. The transformation was instantaneous. Emergency lighting flooded the chamber, revealing details that had been hidden in their limited headlamp beams. The space was even larger than they'd imagined, easily the size of a small airplane hangar. Clean, organized, and built to last centuries. "Motion sensors," Dr. Chen observed, pointing to small devices mounted at strategic locations. "The system knew we were here before we even entered the chamber." A low hum filled the air as ventilation fans activated throughout the complex. Sarah felt fresh air moving across her face, carrying no trace of the staleness she'd expected from a sealed underground space. "The air quality is better down here than it was in the cabin," Marcus noted, checking a small device from his pack. "How is that possible?" Their answer came from Jake, who had discovered another passage leading off the main chamber. "Filtration system," he called back to them. "Military grade from the looks of it. This whole place is designed to be completely self-sufficient." Sarah climbed to the second level, her footsteps ringing on metal grating. The first doorway she encountered opened onto what could only be described as an underground apartment, modest but comfortable, with a bed, desk, bookshelf lined with technical manuals, and a small kitchenette. Everything was clean, organized, waiting. "There are at least a dozen rooms like this," she reported over the radio. "Living quarters for multiple people. Storage rooms down here," Marcus's voice echoed from somewhere below. "Food supplies, medical equipment, tools, enough to supply a small town for months." Dr. Chen had found something that made her go very still. "Sarah, you need to see this immediately." The urgency in her voice sent Sarah hurrying back down to the main level. She found the doctor standing before a large map mounted on the wall near the control panel. At first glance, it appeared to be a standard topographical survey of the local area. Then Sarah noticed the markings, dozens of red X's scattered across the map, each with dates written in small, precise handwriting. The dates went back 15 years. The most recent entry was from 2 weeks ago. "What are the X's marking?" Sarah asked, though something cold was already forming in her stomach. Dr. Chen pointed to one of the closest marks. Sarah recognized the coordinates immediately, the location where they'd found the surveying equipment 3 days ago. Another X marked the spot where the old mining road had been blocked by the suspicious rock slide. "He's been watching," Dr. Chen said quietly. "All these years he's been monitoring everything that happens in these mountains, every expedition, every survey team, every government project." The implications hit Sarah like ice water. This wasn't just a survival bunker, it was an observation post. And somewhere in this underground fortress, Elias Thorne was still watching. The static from Marcus's radio crackled through the chamber like breaking ice. Sarah grabbed it before he could react, her fingers fumbling with the controls as she tried to adjust the frequency. The voices were clearer now, multiple teams coordinating search patterns across the mountain. "Base, this is Eagle 2. No sign of them at the primary entrance. Cave mouth is completely sealed by the avalanche. Copy that, Eagle 2. Thermal imaging shows nothing in the immediate area." Marcus reached for the radio, but Sarah pulled it away. "They think we're dead," she whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the vast space around them. Chen looked up from where he'd been examining a series of pipes that ran along the wall. "Maybe that's for the best, at least until we understand what we're dealing with here." The old man, Jakob, had been silent since leading them through the maze of tunnels. He sat now on what appeared to be a hand-carved wooden bench, his weathered hands folded in his lap. In the LED light from their headlamps, the lines on his face seemed deeper, carved by decades of isolation and whatever secrets this place held. 30 years, Dr. Reeves said, breaking the silence. She was studying the walls with the intense focus Sarah recognized from their previous encounters. "You've been building this for 30 years. Jacob nodded slowly. "Started the year after my discharge, after I realized what was coming." "What was coming?" Marcus demanded. His patience was wearing thin, and Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. The storm, the cave-in, finding this impossible underground complex. It was pushing all of them to their limits. Instead of answering, Jacob stood and walked to what Sarah had initially mistaken for a natural rock formation. As he approached, motion sensors triggered and soft lighting illuminated what was clearly an elaborate control panel built into the stone. Banks of monitors flickered to life, showing feeds from dozens of cameras positioned throughout the mountain. "Jesus Christ," Chen breathed. The screens revealed the true scope of Jacob's creation. Camera after camera showed chambers, workshops, storage rooms, and corridors that seemed to stretch for miles underground. Some areas were carved from natural caverns, others had been painstakingly excavated by hand. The scale was beyond anything any of them had imagined possible for one man to accomplish. Motion sensors, thermal regulation, water filtration, hydroponics, Jacob said matter-of-factly, as if listing items from a grocery store. Everything needed for long-term habitation. "Habitation by how many people?" Dr. Reeves asked. 200, comfortably, more in an emergency. Sarah felt her stomach drop. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just the eccentric project of a lonely hermit. This was a survival bunker designed for a small community. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Jakub turned from the monitors, and for the first time since they'd found him, his expression showed something other than resignation. There was fear there, old and deep. Because I've seen what happens when civilization breaks down. I've seen what people become when the thin veneer of society gets stripped away. His voice carried the weight of experience. And I've seen the signs building for decades. He gestured to another bank of monitors that Sarah hadn't noticed before. These showed news feeds, weather patterns, seismic data, economic indicators, information streaming in from the outside world through satellite uplinks that must have been hidden somewhere on the mountain's surface. Climate change, political instability, resource depletion, pandemic potential, Jakub continued. Pick your catastrophe. They're all converging faster than anyone wants to admit. Marcus stepped closer to the screens, his tactical mind clearly working through the implications. You built all this to survive the end of the world? Not the end of the world, Jakub corrected. The end of the world as we know it. There's a difference. Chen had wandered over to another section of the control center where geological surveys and topographical maps covered an entire wall. These mining charts, he said, they're not just for this mountain. You've been mapping the entire region. Natural resources, water tables, defensive positions, Jakub confirmed. Everything needed to rebuild when the time comes. The radio in Sarah's hands squawked again, bringing them back to their immediate situation. The rescue teams were expanding their search, but their voices were growing more distant. Soon they would give up and wait for the storm to pass before mounting a more comprehensive recovery effort. They'll find the entrance eventually, Marcus pointed out, when they bring in heavy equipment to clear the avalanche debris. Jakub nodded. I know. That's why I brought you here instead of letting you freeze to death in that cave. The time for secrecy was always going to end eventually. I just didn't expect it to happen like this. He moved to yet another console and began entering commands. Throughout the complex, more systems came online. The sound of generators humming to life echoed from deep within the mountain. If you're going to be my first guests, Jakub said, we might as well do this properly. The hydraulic hiss of the massive door sealing behind them made Sarah's stomach clench. They were committed now, trapped in whatever lay ahead in the depths of Ezra's fortress. The corridor stretched before them, carved from living rock and lined with the same phosphorescent strips that had guided them this far. Marcus moved beside her, his breathing shallow. The revelation about the government's involvement had shaken him more than he'd admitted. 27 years, he muttered. All this time they knew. Focus on now, Sarah said, though her own mind reeled with questions. The documents they'd found painted a picture of betrayal and abandonment that made her sick. But somewhere ahead, Ezra might still be alive, and that had to matter more than decades-old conspiracies. The corridor branched into 3 passages. Dr. Chen consulted the hand-drawn map they'd discovered in Ezra's study. Left passage leads to what he labeled deep storage. Center goes to operations. Right says sanctuary. Sanctuary sounds promising, Torres said, adjusting his pack. The deputy had grown increasingly quiet since they'd descended into the fortress, his usual bravado replaced by something approaching awe. They took the right passage, their footsteps echoing despite their attempts at stealth. The walls here showed different construction, older, cruder. This was where Ezra had started, Sarah realized. 3 decades ago, a broken man had begun digging into the mountain with nothing but determination and rage. The passage opened into a circular chamber that took Sarah's breath away. Carved alcoves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, each containing carefully preserved items, photographs, books, personal mementos. But it was the center of the room that drew their attention. A raised platform supporting what looked like a simple bed, and on it, a figure lying perfectly still. Ezra, Sarah whispered. They approached carefully. The old man lay on his back, hands folded across his chest, eyes closed. His breathing was so shallow it was barely visible, but it was there, alive but barely. Dr. Chen knelt beside him, checking vitals with practiced efficiency. Pulse is weak but steady. He's hypothermic, dehydrated, and... She frowned, examining his face more closely. There's something else. His pupils are dilated, unresponsive. This looks like deliberate sedation. He drugged himself? Marcus asked. Possibly, or someone else did. Chen's expression darkened. These symptoms suggest a barbiturate of some kind, enough to keep him in a suspended state, but not enough to kill. Yet, Sarah studied the alcoves surrounding them. Each told a story, military commendations next to faded family photos, technical manuals beside children's drawings, weapons maintenance guides, adjacent to love letters yellow with age. This wasn't just a shelter, it was a shrine to a life interrupted, a memorial to the man Ezra had been before the government betrayed him. "Look at this," Torres called from across the chamber. He stood before a larger alcove containing what appeared to be a complex radio setup, far more sophisticated than anything they'd seen upstairs. Banks of equipment hummed quietly, lights blinking in steady patterns. Marcus joined him. This is military grade. High-frequency, encrypted communications. He examined the setup more closely. Some of this tech is newer than the rest. Recent modifications. He's been in contact with someone, Sarah said, the implications hitting her. All these years, he wasn't as isolated as everyone thought. Dr. Chen looked up from her examination of Ezra. We need to get him to a hospital. Whatever he took, the effects are deepening. He won't last much longer without intervention. The storm, Torres began, is clearing, a new voice said from behind them. They spun around to find a figure in the passage entrance, tall, lean, wearing modern cold weather gear that contrasted sharply with the ancient stone around them. The stranger's face was hidden by a balaclava, but his stance suggested military training. "Who are you?" Sarah demanded, stepping protectively toward Ezra. "Someone who's been waiting a very long time for this conversation." The stranger pulled off his mask, revealing a weathered face marked by old scars. Colonel James Morrison, formerly of the Rapid Deployment Force. Currently the only surviving member of Ezra's original unit. Marcus tensed. "That's impossible. The records said what they needed to say." Morrison moved into the chamber with careful, measured steps. Just like they said Ezra was dead. Just like they said the mission never existed. His eyes found the unconscious form on the platform. "But some of us don't die as easily as the bureaucrats hope." Sarah felt the pieces clicking together, creating a picture that terrified her. "You've been protecting him all these years." Protecting, hiding, preparing. Morrison's smile held no warmth, because eventually they always come back to clean up loose ends. "And that storm wasn't the only thing that brought you here today." As if summoned by his words, the sound of distant machinery echoed through the fortress, heavy, purposeful, and coming closer. The silence in the chamber was broken only by the soft hum of ventilation systems and Marcus's labored breathing. Sarah knelt beside him, checking his pulse, while Jake examined the contents of the opened vault. The metal shelves contained rows of sealed containers, each meticulously labeled with dates spanning 3 decades. Water purification tablets, emergency medications, radiation detection equipment. Jake read aloud, his voice echoing off the reinforced walls. What the hell was he preparing for? Dr. Chen moved deeper into the vault, her flashlight illuminating technical manuals and scientific journals. "These aren't just survival supplies," she said, pulling out a thick binder. "Look at this. Geological surveys, seismic data, climate projections. This goes back to the 1990s. Sarah helped Marcus sit up against the wall. His eyes were clearer now, though still haunted. "The signs were all there," he whispered. "Even 30 years ago I could see what was coming. The weather patterns changing, the geological instability in the region, but it was more than that." "More than what?" Sarah asked gently. Marcus gestured toward the vault. The government surveys. I worked for the Forest Service then, before I disappeared. I had access to classified environmental assessments. They knew about the fault lines beneath these mountains, the potential for catastrophic seismic events. They knew about the climate data showing extreme weather intensification. Tom, who had been silent since the vault opened, stepped forward. You're saying they covered it up? Not covered up. Ignored. Deemed it too expensive to address, too politically inconvenient to acknowledge. Marcus's voice grew stronger with conviction. I tried to report it through proper channels. I was told to bury the data and focus on my assigned duties. Jake found another container filled with communication equipment. Radio transceivers, satellite phones, emergency beacons. You've been monitoring rescue frequencies all these years, haven't you? Marcus nodded. I've listened to every search and rescue operation in these mountains, watched people die because they didn't understand the real dangers they faced. The blizzard that brought you here. It's just the beginning. Dr. Chen's face had gone pale as she read through the scientific data. These seismic readings. Marcus, when was the last time you updated this equipment? 2 days ago, just before the storm hit. Why? She showed him a handheld device from the vault. Because, according to this data, we're sitting on top of a massive geological instability. The weight of the snow from this blizzard, combined with recent seismic activity, the lights flickered suddenly and a deep rumble echoed through the complex. Everyone froze, listening as the sound faded. That wasn't thunder, Tom said grimly. Marcus struggled to his feet. The eastern support structures. I've been monitoring stress fractures for weeks. This storm might have pushed them past their limit. Another rumble, closer this time, sent vibrations through the floor. Dust rained from the ceiling. We need to evacuate, Sarah said. But Marcus shook his head. No, going up now would be suicide. The storm's still raging, and if there's a seismic event... He moved to a control panel on the vault wall. This complex was designed to withstand earthquakes, but not indefinitely. Jake grabbed several containers of supplies. Then, what do you suggest? Marcus activated a series of monitors showing different sections of his underground fortress. Several screens displayed warning indicators. There's an emergency exit tunnel that leads to a cave system 3 miles north. It's above the fault line, and there's a shelter cache there. 3 miles through underground tunnels during a potential earthquake? Tom's skepticism was clear. Better than being buried under a mountain, Marcus replied. He began gathering specific items from the vault, emergency rations, thermal equipment, and the geological monitoring devices. But first, we need to document everything here. Sarah understood immediately. The government data, the environmental assessments. This is evidence of negligence. Evidence that could save lives if the right people see it, Marcus confirmed. But only if we survive long enough to deliver it. Dr. Chen was already photographing documents with her phone. The cellular signal boosters you installed, they're working even down here. I'm uploading everything to cloud storage. A more violent tremor shook the complex, and several containers fell from the shelves. The overhead lights went out completely, leaving only their flashlights to illuminate the vault. That's our cue, Jake said. How long to reach this emergency exit? Marcus sealed the critical documents in a waterproof case. If we move fast and the tunnels hold, maybe 2 hours. But we'll be traveling through sections I haven't used in years. As they prepared to leave the vault, Sarah noticed Marcus taking one last look around the space he'd spent decades building. Any regrets? She asked. He shouldered his pack and checked his equipment one final time. Only that it took a rescue team getting trapped down here for me to finally share what I've learned. Another seismic tremor decided the matter for them. Marcus led them out of the vault and deeper into his underground fortress, toward passages that would either lead them to safety or become their tomb. The hydraulic hiss of the main vault door echoed through the chamber as Marcus led them deeper into his underground domain. Sarah's headlamp swept across walls lined with monitors displaying weather patterns, seismic readings, and what appeared to be satellite feeds from around the globe. 30 years, Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of decades in isolation. Started digging the day after my daughter died in that avalanche. Everyone thought grief had broken me, but it clarified everything. His weathered hands moved across a control panel with practiced precision. The mountains talk to those who listen. They've been screaming warnings for years. Jake pressed closer to one of the monitors, watching data streams cascade across multiple screens. This equipment, it's military grade. How did you... I wasn't always a hermit. Marcus's laugh held no humor. Geological survey specialist, Army Corps of Engineers. I knew what was coming long before the scientists started their cautious warnings about climate instability. He gestured toward a massive wall display showing temperature fluctuations across the region. This blizzard isn't just weather, it's the beginning. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain cold. Beginning of what? Marcus moved to another bank of controls, and suddenly the chamber filled with a low rumbling. Massive panels slid apart, revealing an adjacent cavern that stretched beyond their light's reach. The space was filled with industrial equipment, generators, water purification systems, hydroponic gardens, extending in neat rows under artificial suns. The collapse, Marcus said simply. Supply chains failing, power grids overwhelmed, millions unprepared for what the planet's been trying to tell us. I've watched the patterns, tracked the data. The frequency of extreme weather events has tripled in just the past 5 years. Emily's voice trembled as she spoke into her radio. Base camp, are you receiving? We need immediate backup down here. Static answered her. Base camp, respond. 800 feet of granite above us, Marcus explained. No signals in or out unless I allow it. Your people think you're dead, just like everyone thinks I am. Sometimes death is the only way to truly live. Jake backed toward the entrance they'd come through, but the heavy door had sealed behind them. You can't keep us here. I'm not keeping you anywhere. Marcus touched another control, and a section of the far wall brightened, revealing windows that looked out into yet another chamber. This one contained living quarters, beds, a kitchen, bookshelves stretching to the ceiling. But up there the temperatures dropped to 40 below. Wind speeds are hitting 80 miles per hour. The rescue teams have been called back. Even if you could reach the surface, you'd die in minutes. Sarah moved closer to the windows, her breath fogging the glass. The living space beyond looked comfortable, almost cozy despite being carved from solid rock. Family photos lined one shelf, a young girl with Marcus's eyes, a woman with a gentle smile. Your daughter. What was her name? Rebecca. The name seemed to cost him something. She was 7, wanted to be a mountain guide like her old man. The avalanche that took her was unprecedented, came down from elevations that had been stable for decades. But the warming and cooling cycles had destabilized everything. He joined Sarah at the window. I couldn't save her, but I could save others. If they'd listen. By kidnapping rescue workers? Emily's hand rested on her sidearm, though she made no move to draw it. By showing them what's possible. Marcus turned back to the monitoring equipment. Every system up there is failing, communications, transportation, emergency services. But down here, we have everything needed to survive for years, decades. The chamber shuddered slightly, and dust drifted from the ceiling. Marcus checked his displays, nodding grimly. Another avalanche. 3rd one since you arrived. The mountain's reshaping itself. Jake studied the seismic readings over Marcus's shoulder. These numbers, if this is accurate, half the valley could be buried by morning. Not could be, will be. Marcus's fingers danced across the keyboard, bringing up topographical projections. I've been modeling this event for 20 years. The convergence of extreme cold, unprecedented snow load, and unstable terrain conditions. Your base camp is directly in the path. Sarah felt her world tilting. Our team, 20 people are up there. We're up there. Marcus pulled up external camera feeds showing nothing but swirling white chaos. I monitored their evacuation 3 hours ago. They barely made it to the road before the main slide hit. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of machinery and the distant whisper of recycled air. Emily slowly lowered her radio, the reality settling over all of them like another kind of avalanche. "So what now?" Sarah asked. "We just stay?" Marcus looked at each of them in turn, his eyes holding depths carved by loss and solitude. "Now you decide. Fight the mountain and die with the old world, or learn to live with what's coming." Outside, the blizzard raged on, but down here in Marcus's fortress, time seemed suspended between one world ending and another beginning. The generator's hum filled the cavern as Sarah worked frantically at the radio, her fingers dancing across the dials while Marcus stood guard at the main entrance. The static crackled and popped, occasionally breaking into fragments of distant voices, emergency frequencies, search teams, the outside world that felt impossibly far away despite being only 20 feet above their heads. "Come on," she muttered, adjusting the antenna array that Ezra had somehow managed to snake through natural fissures in the rock to reach the surface. The man's ingenuity never ceased to amaze her, even now when his life hung in the balance. Through the speakers came a burst of clarity, search operations suspended due to weather conditions. Repeat, all ground teams return to base immediately. Sarah grabbed the microphone. "This is Search Team Delta, do you copy? We have survivors and require immediate medical evacuation." Static answered her. Then, faintly, "Delta Team? You were reported missing 12 hours ago. What's your position?" "Underground facility, coordinates." She rattled off the GPS readings from Marcus's device, hoping the signal would penetrate the stone barrier above them. "We have one critical injury requiring immediate attention. Subject is hypothermic with possible internal bleeding." The response crackled through layers of interference. "Negative on immediate extraction. Weather front has intensified. Winds at 60 miles per hour with zero visibility. Earliest possible rescue window is 18 hours. 18 hours. Sarah looked across the workshop where Jennifer knelt beside Ezra's still form. The man's breathing had become increasingly shallow, his skin taking on a greyish pallor that spoke of blood loss and shock. They'd done everything they could with the medical supplies from his extensive stores, but he needed real help. Surgery, blood transfusions, equipment they didn't have. "Understood," she transmitted. "We'll maintain position and provide updates every 2 hours on this frequency." She set down the microphone and turned to find Marcus studying a detailed map of the facility that Ezra had somehow found strength to sketch for them before losing consciousness again. The complex was even larger than they'd imagined. The workshop and living areas they'd explored represented perhaps half of what the old man had carved from the living rock. "He marked something here," Marcus said, pointing to a section labeled Emergency Cache, Medical. "Says it's through the workshop down a maintenance tunnel." Jennifer looked up from her patient. "His pulse is getting weaker. If there's anything down there that could help..." "I'll go," Sarah said, grabbing one of the LED lanterns. "You two stay with him." The tunnel Marcus had indicated was narrow, barely wide enough for her shoulders, but it opened into another carved chamber after 50 feet of crawling. This room was different from the others, sterile, organized like a hospital supply closet. Shelves lined the walls, filled with medical equipment that looked far more sophisticated than anything a simple mountain hermit should possess. Surgical instruments, antibiotics, 4 bags and tubing, even a portable defibrillator unit still in its case. Sarah stared at the array in growing bewilderment. This wasn't the collection of a survivalist preparing for emergencies. This was professional-grade medical equipment, the kind found in emergency rooms and military field hospitals. A locked cabinet caught her attention. Through the glass doors, she could see vials of medication, their labels bearing the distinctive markings of military pharmaceutical supplies, restricted drugs, the kind that required special clearances and security protocols. The lock yielded to the bolt cutters hanging nearby. Ezra had apparently planned for situations where speed mattered more than security. Inside, she found what she was looking for: emergency blood expanders, powerful antibiotics, and pain medications that could stabilize someone long enough for real help to arrive. She also found something else: a file folder, water-stained but readable, containing documents that made her hands shake as she read them. Military service records for someone named Ezra Chen, not the surname he'd given them. Special forces, multiple deployments, medical training, and stamped across the top of several pages, classified. The final document was a psychiatric evaluation, dated 31 years ago, post-traumatic stress disorder, recommendation for extended leave, and at the bottom, a handwritten note: subject has requested permission to maintain off-grid residence for therapeutic purposes. Recommend approval with periodic check-ins. 31 years. He'd been hiding here for 31 years, not as a simple recluse, but as a trained soldier dealing with demons none of them could imagine. The medical supplies, the sophisticated equipment, even the defensive positions she'd noticed in the facility's design. It all made sense now. Sarah grabbed what she needed and crawled back through the tunnel, her mind racing. When she emerged into the workshop, Marcus and Jennifer were bent over Ezra, whose breathing had become barely perceptible. "I found supplies," she announced, setting down the medical kit. But as Jennifer began preparing the 4-line with hands trained in emergency procedures, Sarah wondered what other secrets lay hidden in the depths of this underground fortress, and whether the man they were fighting to save was the hermit he claimed to be, or something else entirely. The stench hit them before they saw the bodies. Sarah covered her nose with her sleeve as Marcus swept his flashlight across the chamber they'd discovered behind a concealed panel. 3 corpses lay scattered on the stone floor, their clothes torn and bloody, faces frozen in expressions of terror. "Jesus," Marcus whispered. "How long have they been here?" Dr. Chen knelt beside the nearest body, careful not to disturb the scene. "Based on decomposition and the cold temperature, I'd estimate 6 months, maybe longer." She pointed to defensive wounds on the victim's hands. They fought back against something. Sarah's stomach churned as she examined the claw marks gouged deep into the stone walls. Whatever had killed these people possessed incredible strength. "These aren't human scratches." "No," Chen agreed grimly. "They're not." A low rumble echoed through the fortress, different from the storm above. This sound came from below, from the depths they hadn't yet explored. Marcus gripped his rifle tighter, the weapon suddenly feeling inadequate. "We need to find Jakob and get out of here," Sarah said, backing toward the chamber entrance. "Now!" But as they turned to leave, they found their path blocked. Jakob stood in the doorway, his weathered face illuminated by their flashlights. His eyes held a sadness that seemed to carry the weight of decades. "You weren't supposed to find this room," he said quietly. Marcus raised his rifle halfway, uncertain. "Jakob, we've been looking everywhere for you. What happened here?" The old man stepped into the chamber, moving with surprising grace for his age. "Trespassers. They came last spring, thinking they'd found an abandoned mine. I tried to warn them, tried to make them leave." His voice cracked. "But they wouldn't listen." "Warn them about what?" Sarah demanded. "What's down here, Jakob?" Before he could answer, another rumble shook the fortress. Dust rained from the ceiling, and somewhere in the distance they heard the sound of stone scraping against stone. Jakob's face went pale. "It's awake," he breathed. "You've woken it up." Dr. Chen stood slowly, her scientific mind racing. "Jakob, what exactly have you been guarding down here? What did you find when you built this place?" The old man's hands trembled as he pulled a worn journal from his coat. "I didn't build this fortress to survive the winter storms. I built it to contain something that should never see daylight again." He handed the journal to Sarah with shaking fingers. "Read it. Then you'll understand why I could never leave." Sarah opened the journal, scanning Jakob's cramped handwriting by flashlight. The entries dated back 30 years, chronicling his discovery of the cave system and something far more disturbing. "My God," she whispered. "Jakob, This says you found it hibernating, some kind of predator that's been sleeping here for decades. Longer than that, Jacob corrected. The native tribes knew about it, called it the winter stalker. That's why they never settled in these mountains permanently. They understood what I didn't until it was too late. Another rumble, closer now. The sound of something massive moving through tunnels below them. Marcus checked his ammunition, knowing it wouldn't be enough against whatever was coming. How did you keep it contained? Chen asked, her scientist's curiosity overriding her fear. Jacob gestured to speakers mounted in the chamber corners, connected by cables that snaked through holes in the walls. Sound, high-frequency pulses that keep it disoriented, confused. But the storm damaged the generator, the systems failing. As if summoned by his words, the lights flickered and dimmed. The almost inaudible hum they'd grown accustomed to stuttered and died. In the sudden silence, they heard something else, the deliberate scrape of claws on stone moving up from the depths below. The backup generator, Jacob said urgently. It's in the lower level. If we can restart the sound system. You want us to go down there? Marcus interrupted. Toward that thing? It's the only way, Jacob insisted. Without the sound barriers, it'll break free, and when it does, it won't stop hunting until spring. Every town in these mountains, every family. His voice trailed off as the implications sank in. Sarah felt the weight of impossible choice settling on her shoulders. They could flee, try to reach the surface and warn the outside world. But by then it might be too late for countless innocent people. Or they could descend into the creature's domain, risking their lives to repair a system they barely understood. The scraping sounds grew louder, accompanied now by a low, predatory growl that seemed to vibrate through the stone itself. Whatever was climbing toward them had patience born of decades, hunger sharpened by months of interrupted sleep. There's something else, Jacob said, his voice barely audible above the approaching threat. The journal doesn't tell you everything. There's a reason I really stayed, a reason I could never leave this place. He looked at each of them in turn, his eyes reflecting 30 years of terrible secrets. I'm not entirely human anymore. The ground shook again, more violently this time, and dust rained from the reinforced ceiling. Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm as they stumbled through the corridor, following Thomas's surprisingly swift pace despite his injured leg. The charges are sequential, Thomas called back, his voice strained but urgent. I built them to collapse specific sections in order. We have maybe 20 minutes before the whole eastern wing comes down. Behind them, the rescue teams struggled with their equipment. Rodriguez had abandoned most of the heavy gear, keeping only the essential communication device that crackled with static as they moved deeper underground. Why? Sarah shouted over the rumbling. Why destroy everything you've built? Thomas paused at a junction, consulting a worn map he'd pulled from his pocket. Because some things are too dangerous to leave behind, and because 30 years of preparation taught me that sometimes you have to sacrifice what you love to protect what matters. They turned left into a corridor Sarah hadn't seen before. The walls here were different, smoother, more carefully crafted. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as they passed rooms filled with sophisticated equipment she couldn't identify. Through one open door, she glimpsed banks of monitors and what looked like a small laboratory. What is all this? Marcus demanded, stopping despite Thomas's urgency to keep moving. Insurance, Thomas replied. Research. Things I hoped I'd never need. He looked back at them, his weathered face grim. The virus I mentioned, it's not theoretical. I've been tracking its development for 15 years. Another explosion, closer this time. The lights flickered, and for a terrifying moment they were plunged into darkness before the emergency systems kicked in. Rodriguez's radio suddenly crackled to life. Base to Rescue 1, come in. We're showing massive seismic activity at your location. What's your status? Rodriguez keyed the mic. We're alive, but the subject's facility is collapsing around us. He's leading us out through an alternate route. Copy that. Be advised, we're tracking unusual weather patterns approaching your area. Looks like another storm system, bigger than the last one. Thomas overheard and grimaced. They're connected, he muttered. The timing isn't coincidental. What do you mean? Sarah asked as they climbed a steep stairway carved directly from the rock. The research I've been doing, the patterns I've tracked, extreme weather events often correlate with increased seismic activity in this region. But there's more to it than natural causes. He paused at a heavy steel door, entering a complex code. Someone's been manipulating weather systems, testing them. The blizzard that brought you here wasn't entirely natural. The door opened onto a chamber that took Sarah's breath away. It was enormous, easily the size of an aircraft hangar, with a domed ceiling that seemed to extend impossibly high. But what dominated the space was a massive vehicle, part submarine, part tank, unlike anything she'd ever seen. "Oh my God," Marcus whispered. "What is that thing?" "Transportation," Thomas said simply, "and our way out." The vehicle sat in what was obviously a launch bay, with massive doors at the far end that she assumed led to the surface. Its hull was scarred and weathered, suggesting it had been used before. "You've been leaving the mountain," Sarah realized. "You haven't been a hermit at all." Thomas nodded as he moved to the vehicle's side hatch, which opened with a pneumatic hiss. "I've been gathering intelligence, collecting samples, documenting what's been happening to our world, while everyone else assumed it was just climate change." He gestured for them to board. "The truth is much worse." Inside, the vehicle was cramped but sophisticated. Banks of equipment lined the walls, and Sarah could see multiple communication arrays and what looked like scientific instruments. Rodriguez helped secure the gear while Marcus stared at the complex control systems. "How long will it take to reach safety?" Rodriguez asked. Thomas was already powering up systems, and the low hum of engines filled the cabin. "Depends on your definition of safety. I can get us to my secondary facility in about 4 hours, but after what I discovered this week, nowhere is truly safe anymore." The launch sequence was surprisingly smooth. Massive doors ground open above them, revealing a tunnel that angled upward into darkness. As they began to move, Sarah felt the mountain shaking behind them. Thomas's carefully constructed fortress finally succumbing to his own demolition charges. "The evidence," she said suddenly. "All your research, it's being destroyed." "The copies are safely stored at 3 other locations," Thomas replied, not taking his eyes off the controls. "I learned long ago never to keep all your eggs in one basket." As they emerged from the tunnel into the storm-lashed wilderness, Sarah looked back to see smoke and steam rising from the mountainside. 30 years of Thomas's life were disappearing beneath tons of rock and snow. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. Thomas adjusted their heading, and through the windscreen, Sarah could see the lights of another storm approaching on the horizon, this one larger and more ominous than any natural weather system she'd ever witnessed. "Now," Thomas said quietly, "we prepare for war." The generator's hum filled the cavern as Maya worked frantically at the central console, her fingers flying over switches and dials that controlled 30 years of Harold's meticulous engineering. Outside, the blizzard raged with unprecedented fury, but down here in the fortress's heart, she felt the mountain itself trembling, not from wind, but from something far more catastrophic. "The support beams in Sector 7 are showing stress fractures," Dr. Chen called out, his voice tight with concern as he monitored the structural readings. "Whatever's happening up there, it's affecting the entire mountain's stability." Jake emerged from the communications alcove, his face grim. "I got through to base camp for 30 seconds before we lost signal again. They're reporting seismic activity across the entire range. This isn't just a storm anymore." Maya's hands stilled on the controls as Harold's final words echoed in her memory. He'd known something like this might happen. Every system in this fortress, every redundancy and failsafe had been built not just for survival during a blizzard, but for something much worse. She pulled up the geological monitoring display and her blood ran cold. "The permafrost is destabilizing," she whispered, watching the temperature readings spike across multiple sensors Harold had embedded throughout the mountain. "The thermal vents, They're not just warming the fortress anymore, they're heating the entire subsurface. Sarah looked up from where she'd been tending to the rescued climber, whose condition had stabilized but remained critical. What does that mean? It means Harold wasn't just a survivalist, Maya said, her voice filled with dawning understanding. He was trying to prevent a disaster. These mountains sit on a massive permafrost layer that's been acting like geological cement for decades. If it melts... A deep rumble shook the chamber, and dust rained from the reinforced ceiling. Through the fortress's sophisticated sensor network, they watched in real time as entire sections of mountainside began to shift. Harold's underground stronghold suddenly made perfect sense. He hadn't been hiding from people, he'd been preparing for the day when the mountain itself would become uninhabitable. Jake grabbed the emergency radio, cycling through frequencies. Any station, any station. This is Rescue Team 7. We have an emergency geological event in progress. The entire mountain range is unstable. Repeat, massive landslide danger imminent. Static answered him, broken only by brief bursts of panicked voices from other rescue teams scattered across the mountains. Maya realized with growing horror that they weren't the only ones in danger. There were dozens of people out there, caught between the blizzard above and the disintegrating mountain below. There, Dr. Chen pointed to a schematic on the wall that none of them had fully understood until now. Harold mapped safe evacuation routes through natural cave systems, but look at this. He traced a line that connected multiple points across the mountain range. These aren't just escape routes. They're designed to channel meltwater and debris away from populated areas in the valley. Maya stared at the intricate network Harold had discovered and modified over 3 decades. Every tunnel, every reinforcement, every carefully placed support beam was part of a massive early warning and mitigation system. The old man hadn't been a hermit. He'd been a guardian, spending his life preparing for a catastrophe that everyone else had ignored. "We need to activate the warning system," she said, moving to another console. Harold built transmission boosters throughout these mountains. If we can get them online simultaneously, we can reach everyone at once. The fortress shuddered again, more violently this time. Through the periscope system, they glimpsed massive chunks of ice and rock careening down the mountainside, carving new valleys in their wake. The blizzard had become secondary to the geological apocalypse unfolding around them. Sarah worked alongside Maya, following Harold's detailed operating procedures. "He's got contingencies for everything," she marveled grimly. "Emergency power, water recycling, even air filtration for volcanic ash. What did he know that the rest of us didn't?" "Enough to spend 30 years preparing," Maya replied, finally managing to establish contact with the warning network. Her voice carried across every emergency frequency as she broadcast coordinates for Harold's hidden shelters and safe passages, places she now realized he'd prepared not for himself, but for anyone who might need them. As they worked to coordinate rescue efforts from deep underground, Maya felt the weight of Harold's legacy settling around them. The fortress wasn't just his home, it was his life's work, a monument to foresight and determination that would save countless lives in the hours to come. But even as they managed to guide stranded climbers toward safety and alert valley communities to the danger racing toward them, Maya knew they faced an impossible choice. The mountain was coming apart around them, and soon even Harold's incredible fortress might not be enough to keep them alive. The old man had given them the tools for survival, but the mountain itself would decide who lived and who didn't. The emergency beacon's shrill alarm cut through the fortress like a blade. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she recognized the pattern. 3 long bursts, pause, 3 short, 3 long again. SOS. But it wasn't coming from their equipment. "That's coming from outside," Marcus whispered, his face pale in the amber glow of Ezra's lighting system. Ezra moved to a wall panel Sarah hadn't noticed before, his weathered fingers dancing across what looked like primitive switches. Suddenly, multiple screens flickered to life, showing grainy black and white images of the mountain's exterior. The blizzard still raged with supernatural fury, but through the swirling snow, shapes moved with purpose. "How many?" Dr. Chen asked, crowding behind Ezra to peer at the monitors. 12, maybe 15. Ezra's voice carried a weight Sarah had never heard before. Military vehicles. They found us. The beacon continued its desperate cry, and Sarah realized with growing horror that it wasn't a distress call, it was bait. Someone out there knew they were alive, knew they were listening. "They're using our own protocols against us," Marcus said, understanding dawning in his voice. "Standard rescue procedure says we have to respond to an SOS. "We don't have to do anything," Sarah shot back, but even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. None of them could ignore a genuine cry for help. It went against every instinct they'd developed as rescue workers. Ezra's fingers moved to another section of controls, and suddenly they could hear voices through hidden speakers. Static-filled communications crackled through the stone chambers. Heat signatures confirmed inside the mountain. Structural scans show extensive tunnel network. Deploy seismic charges at marked positions. Sarah's stomach dropped. Seismic charges? "They're going to bring the mountain down," Ezra said quietly. His hands had stopped moving across the controls, and for the first time since they'd found him, he looked every one of his 73 years, 30 years of work, gone. "We have to get out of here," Dr. Chen said, already moving toward their packs. "If they're using military-grade explosives—" "No." Ezra's voice stopped her cold. "You don't understand. This isn't just about me anymore." He turned to face them, and Sarah saw something fierce burning in his eyes. "What I built here, what I preserved, it's not just survival gear and supplies, it's proof." "Proof of what?" Sarah demanded. Instead of answering, Ezra led them deeper into the fortress, through passages they hadn't explored. The air grew warmer, and Sarah realized they were descending. The walls here were different, not carved stone, but something that looked almost organic, with a subtle luminescence that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Ezra, what is this place?" Marcus whispered. They emerged into a vast chamber that defied everything Sarah thought she knew about the mountain's geology. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, supported by formations that couldn't be natural, and covering every available surface were symbols, not carved, but somehow grown into the stone itself, pulsing with that same soft light. "I didn't build this part," Ezra said simply. "I found it. 30 years ago, when I was running from my past, I discovered something up here that government agencies have been covering up for decades." Dr. Chen approached one of the walls, her scientific mind overriding her fear. "These formations, they're not geological. The crystalline structure is unlike anything I've seen." "The military isn't here for me," Ezra continued. "They're here because somehow someone detected this. My fortress was built to hide it, to protect it, until the world was ready." The beacon outside grew more insistent, and through the speakers they heard the crackle of radio chatter becoming more urgent. Whoever was out there was running out of patience. "Ready for what?" Sarah asked, though part of her already feared the answer. Ezra placed his hand against one of the glowing symbols, and the entire chamber responded. Light raced along the walls in patterns that hurt to follow with the eye, and a low harmonic sound filled the air. Not quite music, not quite language, but something that spoke directly to the primitive part of the brain that remembered when humanity was young. "For contact," Ezra said. "Real contact. Not the sanitized, controlled version the government has been managing for years, but the truth about what's been waiting under mountains like this all over the world." Above them, the first explosion shook dust from the ceiling. The military had run out of patience. "They'll destroy everything to keep this secret," Ezra said, his voice barely audible over the growing rumble. "But maybe it's time the secret got out." Sarah looked around at the impossible chamber, at her companions, whose faces reflected her own mixture of wonder and terror, and made the hardest decision of her life. "Then we make sure it does." The mountain shuddered again, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the sound of ancient stone beginning to crack. The morning light filtered through the bunker's reinforced windows as Elena packed the last of her supplies into a worn canvas bag. 3 weeks had passed since the rescue teams first discovered Jonas Hartwell's underground fortress, and the world above had transformed as dramatically as the one below. "You sure you won't reconsider?" Sheriff Morrison asked from the doorway, his voice carrying the weight of everything they'd shared in this hidden sanctuary. "The government's offering a substantial consulting fee. Your insights into Jonas's systems could help communities prepare for disasters we can't even imagine yet." Elena shouldered her pack and turned to face the man who'd become more than just a fellow survivor. "I've already given them everything they need, the technical specifications, the sustainability protocols, even Jonas's journals. But this place—" She gestured toward the walls that had sheltered them during the worst storm in recorded history. "This was never meant to be a government project. Jonas built it for people like us." Through the main corridor, she could hear the voices of the families who'd chosen to stay. The Hendersons had decided to make the fortress their permanent home, transforming one of the storage areas into a workshop where Tom could continue his carpentry. Maria Santos had convinced her elderly parents to join her here, drawn by the promise of safety in the tight-knit community that had emerged from shared hardship. Dr. Patterson appeared around the corner, his medical bag in hand. "The CDC team finished their final health assessments this morning. Everyone's clear to leave or stay as they choose." He paused, studying Elena's face. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious about your decision to head north rather than south with the rest of us." Elena smiled, thinking of the coded references she'd found in Jonas's personal notes, mentions of the sister project and coordinates that pointed toward the Canadian wilderness. Let's just say Jonas wasn't the only one preparing for the worst. He had friends, people who shared his vision. I think it's time they knew what he accomplished here. Morrison's radio crackled to life. "Sheriff, the transport vehicles are ready when you are." Outside, the world bore little resemblance to the frozen wasteland that had nearly claimed their lives. The massive storm had indeed marked a turning point, not just in the weather, but in humanity's understanding of what was possible. News crews had finally gained access to the site, broadcasting images of Jonas's remarkable achievement to a world grappling with increasingly unpredictable climate events. The rescue helicopter that had seemed so impossible 3 weeks ago now sat idle next to a convoy of vehicles. Some would carry people back to their old lives, others would transport supplies for those staying behind. Elena noticed young Marcus Chen among the group remaining, his laptop balanced on his knees as he documented every detail of the fortress's operations for the comprehensive guide he was creating. "You taught us something important," Morrison said quietly, as they walked toward the surface entrance. Jonas knew that survival isn't just about stockpiling resources or building walls. It's about creating something worth surviving for. Elena nodded toward the garden chambers visible through the transparent aluminum panels, where children were already helping tend the hydroponic crops that would sustain the community through the coming months. He understood that the real catastrophe wouldn't be any single disaster, but forgetting how to take care of each other when things got difficult. At the surface, she paused to look back at the camouflaged entrance that had remained hidden for 3 decades. The secret was out now, but somehow that felt right. Jonas's legacy wasn't meant to be buried with him. It was meant to grow, to inspire others to prepare not just for survival, but for hope. Morrison handed her a satellite communicator. "Stay in touch. And if you find what you're looking for up north, I'll let you know," she promised. "But something tells me Jonas's story is bigger than any of us realized. Those references to other sites, other people working on similar projects. It suggests there's an entire network out there, people who saw what was coming and decided to do something about it." As her truck pulled away from the site, Elena caught sight of the memorial they'd erected near Jonas's favorite observation post, a simple stone marker bearing his name and the words he'd carved above his workshop door, prepared not for fear, but for love. The road north stretched ahead, winding through forests that had weathered the storm and emerged renewed. Somewhere in that wilderness, other fortresses waited, other communities of survivors who'd learned the same lessons Jonas had spent his life teaching. The greatest adventure wasn't surviving the storm, it was building something worthy of the calm that followed. In her rearview mirror, the mountain grew smaller but no less significant. Jonas Hartwell had vanished into a blizzard and emerged as something far more powerful than the reclusive mountain man people had imagined. He'd become proof that preparation and compassion weren't opposites, but partners in humanity's greatest challenge, learning how to endure together.